it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be chatting through my May TBR. So last month I was able to read a total of 10 books and also got halfway through an 11th novel, so I'm hoping to continue on this reading momentum into this new month of May. The weather's starting to get nicer, but you know, still spending all of my times indoors, so lots of time to read. April was a big month of new genre for me. I read a lot of romance, which is something I don't usually pick up, but I would say this month I'm really craving to, one, read more fantasy than I did last month, but two, perhaps check out a few different genres that I haven't really read recently. So I kind of have a bit of a hodgepodge of a TBR, but I'm excited about it. I do still have a few romance options because I'm sure I'm just gonna need to read one of those in the 24-hour span because they're just so good and they always put a smile on my face. But without further ado, let's dive into my TBR. So the first book I'm gonna quickly chat through is the book I'm currently reading, and that is The Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. I'm currently 350 pages of the way through, and this of course is book 2 to the Farseer trilogy, and I'm really liking it. This basically follows our main character Fitz throughout his life. He's kind of reflecting backwards and then it jumps to like present tense, but meaning like he's an adult reflecting back on his journey to become like this really powerful assassin, I'm assuming. The first one is really just his childhood, but in this one he's more late teens, kind of becoming more of the person he will ultimately be when he becomes like an adult. There's romance and he's much more entrenched in castle politics and also trained to be an assassin at this point. I'm really liking this one. I'm actually flying through it. It's a book that I don't really want to put down. There's great mystery and intrigue, so I'm really excited to finish this month and then continue on to book 3 of this trilogy, The Assassin's Quest, which is obviously the third and final book within this trilogy. I don't really know the contents of this because I'm still in the second one, but I'm sure it's gonna be a wild time. These last 2 books both have really high ratings on Goodreads and everyone is a huge fan of this series, so I don't know, I'm really hoping I can just marathon the last 2 books this month and then get the rest of her books because there are a bunch in this world. I'm curious if they're going to be following characters that we've encountered within this trilogy, if there's going to be a time skip or perhaps like a geography skip, like we're just somewhere else within this universe. I'm not sure, but I'm very excited to find out. It's really nice to have a really long fantasy series ahead of you. There's something really like comforting about that because there's just so many stories to discover. I love long fantasy. It's not something that I'm really intimidated by, but in fact, like the longer, the better in my opinion. And I think this is like pretty establishedly finished. Like each one is very contained, so it's not like people are waiting and waiting for like the final concluding novel. At least I don't think. Next book on my list is a thriller, and that is The Guest List. This is a book I got last month from Book of the Month. I've just been honestly really intrigued by this since it's fallen into my possession. This is a whodunit style, I feel like a modern take on the Agatha Christie And Then There Were None, which was a book I read growing up that I was obsessed with. I am obviously a wimp when it comes to horror, but a classic whodunit style mystery I love. I always find them to be such page turners, and this is basically about a wedding that's set on this remote island. It's kind of like a who's wedding. There's lots of glamorous people there, but then there's a bad storm, they all get stuck, and there's also something like that everyone's hiding. I also think someone dies and they're trying to uncover like who did it. So yeah, I love stuff like this. I'm hoping it's just the ultimate page turner and keeps me guessing. I just find them so entertaining. Ever since I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle and also saw the movie Knives Out, I've just been loving, again, like I've refound my love for these types of stories and I just keep wanting to pick them up. All have a secret, all have a motive, but only one is the murderer. I love it. Next up, I have 2 ebooks that are on my Nook that I'm excited to pick up. The first one is the second Dresden's File book. I think it's Full Moon. I obviously read the first one last month, really liked it, and I honestly like have this craving to also marathon this series. This is an urban fantasy detective story. It's very serialized fiction from what I can gather, but I'm pretty sure like the series, because there's so many books, takes place over a large expanse of time, like over a decade, which really intrigues me. So I really feel like throughout the series you're gonna see Harry Dresden grow up, and in the first ones obviously he's a young wizard detective in the city of Chicago trying to like solve magical crime. He's endearing. I like the magic, the mystery is cool, and I honestly like the elements of wizardry woven in from like a crime perspective. There's like potions and other things like artifacts as well. It's not just pure spell work. I liked the first one. I really want to continue on with my read of this. I love Jim Butcher, and maybe I can get like a good chunk of this series read over the summer, which is kind of my hope. They're all pretty short, quick reads, so I just figure I can just breeze through them on my e-reader. And the other ebook that I have on my list is the next book in the Castles Ever After series. This is another Tessa Dare series. I read the first one, Romancing a Duke, late last month, and I liked it. It definitely wasn't my favorite. It wasn't as good as the Girl Meets Duke series, but I liked it enough and I want to check on the rest of the series. I think the next one is like something with the Marquis, and then the last one is Scott Ties a Knot, which I think is a very famous one. All of these basically follow the premise of like some girl inheriting a castle, and there's some sort of like moody duke or marquis or whatever that they ultimately fall in love with. Tessa Dare is known for her banter, her steamy romance. They're highly entertaining. I breeze through them. They're so much fun to read. So I figure I will definitely be carrying on with this series this month, at least reading one of the 3 books that are available. Next on my TBR is The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I love N.K. Jemisin. I finally finished the Inheritance trilogy last month, so I can dive into her new book. She has quickly become like my favorite author, like definitely top 5. I could not read her books. This is an urban fantasy novel set in New York City. I honestly don't know too much about it, and I kind of want to keep it that way. I love the cover. I know that shouldn't be like a huge draw, but it's so graphic and I think it's really interesting. I feel like it might be a bit of a departure from her past work, so I'm really curious to see like a new type of fantasy from her. But apparently this is a glorious fantasy according to Neil Gaiman. I have literally no doubts. I have only faith in N.K. Jemisin, and I'm really excited to read a fantasy novel set in New York written by her. It's gonna be a great time and I cannot wait. Speaking of anticipated novels, I also have Shorefall. This is Foundries Tied by Robert Jackson Bennett. It's in the mail and it should hopefully arrive soon, and I cannot wait. Foundries Tied, and honestly Robert Jackson Bennett, one of my favorite authors and also one of my favorite books that came out last year. This first book in a new fantasy series just had everything in it and I loved it. It's just one of the most creative and interesting and gripping stories, and it had such urgency throughout it that I loved. I've also since read Robert Jackson Bennett's like other series, like the City of Gods series, which is so good too. But Shorefall has come out, and basically this is set in a world where we follow our main character who is a fantastic thief, and Foundries Tied is the place that she lived. In my opinion, this fantasy world is kind of like a Venetian, Dutch-inspired merchant city. Essentially, there are certain merchant families that hold a lot of power, and they basically have like cities within cities, and within their compounds there's infrastructure, police force. The space that exists between these big cities within the cities is like the remaining 20% is called Foundries Tied, and it's this lawless land, and that's where our character lives. She's a fantastic thief and she's hired to steal an impossible object that she of course successfully steals, and it kind of throws her in the middle of these merchant family politics. On top of that, there's a really cool magic system that's kind of like magic coding in a way. It's basically like understanding the language of items and materials, and if you can crack their code, you can alter their behavior or their composition, and it's so cool. And I just think it's so creative and I love it so much. So the first one flew through, loved, has great romance. There's a girl-girl romance in this as well, and I cannot wait to read the second one. It was great. Counting down the days, and it's on its way. Next on my TBR is The Thief's Daughter by Jeff Wheeler. I of course read the first book in the series now a few months ago, and I just want to continue on with my read of this. There are quite a few books in this world, and I honestly feel like it parallels my read of the Farseer trilogy pretty well, because they kind of remind me of each other. They're very different, but they kind of definitely are reminiscent, like in the same style. First one, we follow our main character Owen as a child, and essentially he's held as a political hostage in the kingdom. In this world, the magic functions as being fountain blessed, so if you're blessed, you're basically very good at something, and it can really vary between like controlling people's minds, being really good at fighting, to making bread. The sequel basically, I think, takes off directly after the first one, and basically Owen is now traveling outside of the kingdom with his really good friend, and I'm really excited to see them grow up together more in a separate location in a more northern locale, which I think will be really cool. I enjoyed the first one. I thought it had intriguing politics. It was really like relaxing to read, if that makes sense, because it felt this sort of traditional fantasy feel, which I really like. So I really want to continue on with this. So hopefully I will read it this month. And the last book I have on my TBR is God's Grave by J. Kristoff. I read Nevernight, I want to say in January, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely a gruesome, cheeky, dark fantasy assassin story that also kind of has this like Roman, Venetian inspiration for its setting. It's honestly a very unique fantasy story. I haven't really read anything quite like it. I feel like it definitely takes the mantle of being this very gruesome tale seriously, so this is not for the faint of heart. It also is very funny, and ultimately I found the first one to be very surprising. I thought it had some interesting twists and turns I wasn't expecting, and I really think it kind of subverted a lot of the tropes you might expect, especially if you're expecting this to be more a YA tale. It's not YA, it's definitely adult, and it will definitely remind you about that throughout this series. Regardless, I liked it, and I really want to read the sequel before I forget too much that happened in the first book. I honestly have no idea where the story is going to take off based on the events of the first one, because that was a wild time, so I'm, you know, honestly very intrigued. So this is definitely on my TBR. I feel like this will be a perfect, very entertaining read, and yeah, so I have this, and it's signed. I got this a really long time ago. Ooh, where is it? Heyo, signed. Hey guys, so that is my May TBR. Let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye.